Blood was still drying on the lapel of his bespoke Brioni suit when the piercing cries echoed through the marble foyer. Cassian Moretti, a man who controlled the eastern seaboard's illicit shipping ports with a ruthless efficiency, froze in his tracks. In his scarred hands wasn't a ledger, a weapon, or a frightened rival. It was a 6-month-old boy. The elite childcare agencies of Manhattan had taken one look at the heavily armed guards outside his penthouse and handed him a ridiculous invoice, $20,000 a week, plus hazard pay and a bulletproof SUV. They saw a monster holding a massive liability. But the quiet girl, clutching a polishing cloth by the mahogany staircase, saw something else entirely. She saw a terrified father drowning in his own life. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended high above the glittering grid of New York City. To the outside world, Cassian Moretti was a venture capitalist with aggressive, untouchable portfolios. To the federal government and the underground syndicate he ruled, he was the apex predator of the Costa Nostra's new generation. Yet, on this rainy Tuesday evening, all his power meant absolutely nothing. Little Luca was screaming. It wasn't a fussy whimper. It was a red-faced, lung-tearing wail of pure misery. Sitting across from Cassian in the sprawling living room was Violet Sterling, the head of Sterling and Hayes Elite Domestic Staffing. Violet was a woman whose Chanel suits and perfectly coiffed blonde hair usually masked a steely business acumen, but right now she was sweating profusely, her eyes darting nervously toward the 2 massive men flanking the apartment's private elevator. "Mr. Moretti, please understand our position," Violet said, her voice trembling slightly over Luca's cries. "Our nannies are highly trained professionals. They are accustomed to demanding clients, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, royals. But your specific circumstances present an unprecedented risk. My board of directors has authorized me to offer our top-tier service, but the premium is non-negotiable, $20,000 a week, a private security detail composed of our own ex-military contractors, full indemnification in the event of unforeseen violence." Cassian sat motionless in his leather armchair. He looked down at the screaming infant in the bassinet beside him. Luca's mother, a tragic casualty of a life she never truly understood, was gone. Cassian was left with an heir he barely knew, and a heart that had long ago turned to ash. $20,000 a week to feed a baby and change diapers, Cassian said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that didn't need volume to command absolute terror. "You are trying to extort me, Miss Sterling. People who try to extort me usually end up finding the bottom of the Hudson River incredibly accommodating." Violet swallowed hard, clutching her Birkin bag like a shield. "It is hazard pay, Mr. Moretti. The men outside your door are carrying suppressed weapons. One of my girls cannot be expected to walk into a war zone for standard union rates." In the shadows of the adjoining dining room, Nora Mitchell stood frozen. She was 23 years old, wearing the drab grey uniform of the discreet, high-end cleaning service Cassian employed to scrub the blood and secrets out of his floorboards. Nora was essentially invisible in this world. She was a ghost who dusted the priceless art and polished the Italian marble, struggling to survive beneath a mountain of crushing medical debt left behind by her late mother's battle with cancer. She had been silently wiping down the oak dining table, trying to make herself as small as possible. But the baby's cries were tearing at her chest. She watched as Cassian, a man known to execute traitors without a flinch, reached awkwardly into the bassinet. He picked up Luca, his large, heavily tattooed arms stiff and unnatural. He bounced the boy with a rigid, panicked rhythm. It only made Luca scream louder. "Get out!" Cassian snapped at Violet, his frustration boiling over. "Mr. Moretti, if you reconsider—" "I said get out!" he roared, the sheer force of his voice rattling the crystal decanters on the bar. Violet didn't need to be told a third time. She scrambled to her feet, nearly tripping over her Louboutins, and scurried towards the elevator, flanked instantly by the guards who ushered her out. The heavy steel doors closed, leaving a deafening vacuum in the penthouse, filled only by the baby's relentless weeping. Cassian squeezed his eyes shut, a dangerous mix of rage and despair crossing his sharp, aristocratic features. He looked like a cornered wolf holding a fragile bird. Nora couldn't stop herself. Survival instincts told her to stay hidden, to finish her shift and disappear into the subway. But her humanity won out. She set the polishing cloth down on the table and stepped out of the shadows. "Sir?" Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it cut through the noise. Cassian spun around, his hand instinctively dropping towards the concealed holster beneath his suit jacket, his dark, cold eyes locked onto her. "Who the hell are you?" "Nora, I clean here on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said, keeping her hands visible and her tone steady, despite the wild hammering of her heart. She took a slow step forward. "You're holding him too tight, sir, and he's arching his back. I think he has gas." Cassian stared at her, utterly bewildered. "Gas?" "Yes, may I?" Nora didn't wait for his permission. The agonizing sound of the baby overrode her fear of the city's most dangerous man. She closed the distance between them. Up close, Cassian was even more intimidating. Tall, broad-shouldered, radiating a dark, kinetic energy. But Nora focused only on the child. She gently slid her hands under Luca, lifting him from Cassian's awkward grip. Cassian tensed, every instinct screaming at him to protect his son, but something in Nora's calm, fluid movements made him release the boy. Nora settled Luca against her shoulder, supporting his head with one hand while gently but firmly patting his lower back with the other. She began to sway, not with panicked bouncing, but with a slow, rhythmic rock, humming a low, wordless melody. For 30 agonizing seconds, the crying continued. Cassian watched, his jaw clenched so tight it looked ready to shatter. Then, a small burp escaped the baby's lips. The frantic wailing hitched, turned into a soft whimper. And then, silence. Luca's tiny hands uncurled, his breathing slowed. His red face softened as he nestled his cheek into the rough fabric of Nora's cheap cleaning uniform. Within 2 minutes, the exhausted infant was fast asleep. The sudden quiet in the penthouse was heavier than the noise. Cassian stared at the young woman in the grey uniform, his eyes narrowing, calculating. "You," Cassian said softly. "What did you say your name was?" "Nora Mitchell." "Well, Nora Mitchell," Cassian murmured, stepping closer until she could smell the expensive scotch and faint metallic tang of gunpowder clinging to him. "It seems you just put $20,000 a week professionals to shame." Cassian gestured towards the velvet sofa. "Sit." Nora carefully laid the sleeping baby back into his bassinet, making sure he was swaddled securely before she took a seat on the very edge of the sofa. She kept her posture perfectly straight. She knew who Cassian Moretti was. Everyone in her neighborhood in Queens knew the Moretti name. You didn't cross them, you didn't look at them too long, and you certainly didn't talk back to them. Cassian poured himself a measure of Macallan 25, his back to her. "The staffing agency wanted a fortune because they think my life is a liability to my son. They aren't entirely wrong." He turned around, the crystal glass catching the dim light of the city skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "But I will not be extorted, and I will not have strangers who demand corporate security clearances raising my blood." He took a slow sip, his dark eyes studying Nora with an intense, unblinking gaze that made her skin prickle. "You handled him well, better than I can. You have siblings?" "I helped raise my neighbor's kids when their mum worked night shifts," Nora replied quietly, "and I took care of my mother before she passed." "I need a nanny, Nora. Full-time. Live-in. You saw the circus that just walked out of here. I don't have time to interview 100 terrified women. I need someone who isn't going to flinch every time my men walk through the door with a bruised knuckle." He set the glass down. "I'll pay you $5,000 a week. Cash. You move in tonight." Nora's breath hitched. $5,000 a week. It was a staggering sum. It would wipe out the remaining medical debt in 2 months. But she also knew that taking Cassian's money bound her to him. In his world, money was a leash. If she took $5,000 a week from a Mafia boss, she became an employee of the syndicate. She would be complicit, owned, and expected to turn a blind eye to God knows what. But she also had a desperate, immediate problem of her own. Her mother's medical debt hadn't just been owed to hospitals. Toward the end, desperate for experimental treatments, Nora had borrowed $30,000 from a local loan shark in Queens, a brutal enforcer named Jimmy the Pipe Russo, who operated under a rival syndicate. Jimmy had been leaving voicemails threatening to break her legs, or worse, put her to work in one of his illicit clubs to pay it off. Her time was up on Friday. Nora looked at the sleeping baby, so innocent and unaware of the violent empire he had been born into. Then she looked up at the terrifying man who ruled it. "No," Nora said. Cassian's eyebrows drew together. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Excuse me? I won't take your money, Mr. Moretti. I won't do it for 20,000, and I won't do it for 5. She forced her hands to stop trembling, folding them in her lap. "I'll do it for free." Cassian stared at her, utterly silent. He was a man who understood the transactional nature of the world perfectly. Everyone had a price. Everyone wanted something. Free didn't exist in his vocabulary. Free meant a trap. "Explain," he demanded, his voice dangerously soft. "I am in debt to a man in Queens. Jimmy Russo. I borrowed money for my mother's chemotherapy, and I can't pay him back. He told me today that if I don't have the money by Friday, he's coming for me." Nora swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to maintain eye contact with the mob boss. "I don't want your money, because I don't want to be a part of your business. But I need a place where Jimmy can't get to me. I will care for Luca. I will be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I will feed him, bathe him, teach him, and protect him. In exchange, I want room, board, and your word that I am untouchable while I am inside this penthouse." Cassian walked slowly toward her, leaning over the glass coffee table until his face was inches from hers. She could see a faint, faded scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "You're asking for my protection." "I am asking for sanctuary," Nora corrected softly. "You need someone who will look at your son as a child, not a liability or a paycheck. I need a place where I can sleep without locking my door 3 times. Cassian searched her eyes. He was a human lie detector, honed by years of surviving assassinations and betrayals. He saw no deception in the young woman's face. He saw exhaustion, genuine fear of the outside world, and an iron will to survive. "Jimmy the Pipe," Cassian mused, a cruel smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "A street-level thug who runs numbers out of a bodega. You think hiding here will stop him?" "I know the men by the elevator are carrying guns," Nora said simply. "I don't think Jimmy the Pipe will make it past the lobby." Cassian let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a rusty sound, one that hadn't been used in a long time. He stood up straight, adjusting his cuffs. "All right, Nora Mitchell. You have a deal, but there are rules." Cassian held up a finger, his demeanor instantly returning to ice-cold authority. "Rule 1. You never leave this floor with my son without my explicit permission and a minimum of 2 of my guards. Rule 2. You do not ask questions about the men who come here, the meetings I hold in the West Wing, or the phone calls I take. Rule 3. If anything happens to Luca while he is in your care." Cassian didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The promise of violence was implicit, hanging heavy in the air. "Understood," Nora whispered. "Good. The guest suite next to the nursery is yours. My men will retrieve whatever belongings you have from your apartment tomorrow. Welcome to the family." The first 3 weeks in the penthouse were a masterclass in psychological whiplash. The environment was a study in profound contrasts. On one side of the vast, soundproofed apartment was Nora's world. Pastel-colored plush toys, the smell of warm milk, soft lullabies, and the infectious, gummy smiles of an infant learning to recognize her face. On the other side of the heavy oak doors of the West Wing was Cassian's world. Nora often heard the muffled, aggressive arguments of grown men, the heavy thud of boots on the marble floor, and the metallic clatter of things she purposefully chose not to identify. Nora kept her head down. She threw herself into caring for Luca. The baby was a beacon of light in the oppressive, gilded cage. She instituted a strict routine: morning feedings overlooking the sunrise over the East River, afternoon playtime on the thick Persian rugs, and evening baths filled with bubbles. She noticed that Cassian was always watching. He was like a phantom in his own home. He would stand in the doorway of the nursery, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, silently observing as Nora read the Velveteen Rabbit or carefully mashed peas for Luca's lunch. He rarely spoke during these observations, but the heavy, dark circles under his eyes seemed to lighten slightly when he watched his son laugh. The uneasy peace was challenged during Nora's 4th week. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday. The penthouse was dead silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning. Nora jolted awake in her bed. It wasn't a loud noise that woke her. It was a shift in the atmosphere. The baby monitor on her nightstand was buzzing with an odd, distressed whimpering. She threw off her covers and sprinted into the adjoining nursery. The nightlight cast a soft blue glow over the crib. Luca was thrashing, his small face flushed bright red, his skin radiating heat like a furnace. He wasn't crying. He was panting, a terrifying, shallow sound. Panic seized Nora's chest. She scooped him up, pressing her cheek to his forehead. He was burning up. "Cassian!" she screamed, abandoning all protocol. "Cassian, help!" Within 5 seconds, the nursery door was kicked open. Cassian burst into the room, a matte black tactical pistol gripped loosely in his right hand, his eyes wild and searching for a threat. Behind him was Ricky Costa, his underboss, a sleek, dangerous man in his late 30s who always looked at Nora with thinly veiled contempt. "What is it? Who's here?" Cassian demanded, lowering the weapon when he saw no intruders. "It's Luca!" Nora gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "He's burning up. He has a massive fever. He's lethargic. We need to go to the hospital." Cassian dropped the gun on the changing table and rushed over, placing his large hand on the baby's chest. "Christ, he's boiling." He turned to Ricky. "Get the cars ready. Call Mount Sinai. Tell Dr. Aris to clear the VIP pediatric wing immediately." Ricky hesitated, his face hardening. "Cassian, you can't go to Mount Sinai tonight. The feds just raided the docks 3 hours ago. We have heat on us. If you walk into a major hospital right now, you're exposing yourself. We have a private medic on call." "To hell with the medic! My son is burning alive!" Cassian roared, grabbing Ricky by the collar of his expensive silk shirt. "Wait!" Nora yelled, stepping between them with the baby clutched to her chest. Both men froze, shocked by her sudden forcefulness. Ricky is right. If you go to a public hospital in a panic, it draws attention. Babies get sudden fevers, Cassian. It happens. Let me try to bring it down first. If I can't break it in 20 minutes, we go to the hospital. Feds be damned. Deal?" Cassian looked at her, his chest heaving. The ruthless Mafia boss was gone, replaced entirely by a terrified father. He looked at the confident, steady fire in Nora's eyes and slowly released Ricky's collar. 20 minutes. Tell me what you need." "Fill the baby tub with lukewarm water. Not cold, it will shock his system. Tepid," Nora commanded, already moving towards the adjoining bathroom. "Ricky, go to the kitchen. I need infant Tylenol from the medical kit, and a cold compress." For the next 20 minutes, the bathroom of the master suite looked like a war room. Cassian knelt on the hard tile floor, his expensive dress pants soaking wet, gently holding Luca in the tepid bath water, while Nora sponged the baby's back and head. Her hands were gentle, steady, and relentlessly competent. She spoke in low, soothing tones, singing softly to keep the infant calm while the medicine took effect. Cassian couldn't take his eyes off her. The woman who had scrubbed his floors just a month ago was now commanding his household, barking orders at Mafia enforcers and saving his son's life. The dim light of the bathroom highlighted the soft curve of her neck and the fierce determination in her profile. For the first time since his wife died, Cassian felt a strange, terrifying flutter in his chest, a spark of something dangerously close to admiration and attraction. Slowly, agonizingly, the panting stopped. Luca's tight fists uncurled. His skin cooled, returning to its normal, healthy pink. He let out a long, exhausted sigh and slumped against Nora's chest. Nora wrapped him in a thick, warm towel and collapsed against the edge of the bathtub, letting out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a year. It's breaking. The fever is breaking. He's going to be okay. Cassian sat back on his heels, running a wet, trembling hand through his dark hair. He looked at Nora, surrounded by wet towels, her hair plastered to her forehead, holding his son as if he were her own. "Thank you," Cassian said. The words were quiet, stripped of any bravado or authority. They were just the raw, honest words of a man who owed her everything. Standing in the doorway, Ricky watched the exchange. His eyes narrowed. He saw the way his boss looked at the maid. In their world, emotional attachments were liabilities, weaknesses that rivals could exploit, and Ricky, who had his own secret ambitions for the syndicate, realized that this little nobody from Queens was rapidly becoming Cassian Moretti's greatest vulnerability. "I'll cancel the cars," Ricky muttered, turning away into the dark hallway, his mind already spinning a dangerous web. Autumn bled into winter, painting the sprawling canopy of Central Park in shades of frost and brittle gold visible through the reinforced glass of the penthouse. Inside, a fragile ecosystem had taken root. Nora Mitchell had become the undisputed gravitational center of Luca's world, and, though he would never admit it to his capos, Cassian Moretti's as well. The ruthless syndicate boss found himself altering his ironclad schedules. A man who once orchestrated multi-million-dollar contraband shipments out of the port of Newark at dawn was now delaying his morning briefings just to watch Nora feed Luca his mashed bananas. He noticed the way the morning light caught the subtle amber flecks in her brown eyes. He noticed that she never wore the expensive jewelry he had quietly ordered his personal shopper to leave on her vanity. She remained, in every way that mattered, entirely uncorrupted by his world. But Ricky Costa, Cassian's second-in-command, was a man who saw purity only as a structural weakness. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the illusion of safety shattered. Nora was in the massive chef's kitchen, humming softly as she sterilized bottles, while Luca babbled happily in his high chair. The private elevator chimed, signaling a delivery. Usually the heavily armed guards in the foyer intercepted everything, but today it was Ricky who strode into the kitchen, his bespoke Brioni suit tailored to an inch of its life. He carried a small, unadorned, black, cardboard box. "Mail call, sweetheart," Ricky said, his voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that always made Nora's stomach turn. He tossed the box onto the marble island. Fascinating what slips past the doorman when the guards are changing shifts. Nora wiped her hands on a dish towel, her instincts screaming. "What is it?" "Don't know. Addressed to you. Plain white label." Ricky leaned against the counter, picking an imported green grape from a crystal bowl and popping it into his mouth. He didn't leave. He stood there, watching her with dead, reptilian eyes. With trembling fingers, Nora broke the seal on the box. Inside, resting on a bed of cheap tissue paper, was a dog collar. Attached to the metal D-ring was a laminated photograph. All the blood drained from Nora's face. The photograph was of her old apartment building in Queens. More specifically, it was a close-up of her mailbox, with a freshly carved, jagged X scratched deeply into the metal. Clipped to the photo was a handwritten note on the back of a betting slip from the Aqueduct racetrack. Friday came and went, Nora. The meter is running. I know you're in the glass tower. Come out or I come up. Jimmy! Nora gasped, stumbling back until her spine hit the stainless steel refrigerator. The box clattered to the floor. Bad news from home? Ricky asked, feigning mild curiosity, though a sinister smirk played at the corners of his mouth. You know, Cassian runs a very tight ship. He doesn't like loose ends dragging dirt onto his clean floors. If you've got street trash looking for you, maybe it's time you packed your bags before they decide to do something stupid that puts the boss, or the kid, in the crossfire. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You don't belong here, Maid. Take the hint. Run. Before Nora could process the threat, the heavy oak doors of Cassian's home office swung open down the hall. Cassian's heavy, measured footsteps echoed on the hardwood. When he entered the kitchen, the atmosphere instantly hardened into ice. He took one look at Nora's ashen face, then down to the overturned box and the dog collar on the floor. What is this? Cassian demanded. Ricky held up his hands in a placating gesture. Just bringing in the mail, boss. Seems our nanny has some unresolved debts catching up with her. Cassian didn't look at Ricky. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, bending down to pick up the photo and the note. His dark eyes scanned the messy scrawl. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and terrifyingly violent. When Cassian finally spoke, the low, gravelly timbre of his voice made even Ricky stiffen. Ricky, Cassian said quietly, his eyes never leaving the betting slip. How did a package from Jimmy the Pipe, a 2-bit loan shark from Queens, bypass 3 layers of building security, biometric scanners in the elevator, and my personal detail? Ricky cleared his throat, adjusting his cuffs. Like I said, shift change. The lobby guards must have— Do not lie to me in my own home, Cassian interrupted, his head snapping up. The lethal intensity in his gaze pinned Ricky to the spot. A rat couldn't sneeze in the lobby without my men cataloguing it. Someone walked this up here. Someone with clearance. Cassian, you're not implying— Get out. Cassian's voice was a whip crack. Get out of my penthouse. Take the men from the lobby and put a new detail on the door. I will deal with you later. Ricky's jaw clenched. He shot a venomous glare at Nora before turning on his heel and marching out, the elevator doors sliding shut behind him with a sharp hiss. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the violent shaking. He knows where I am, Cassian. Jimmy knows. I have to leave. I can't put Luca in danger. If Jimmy's men try to breach the building— Cassian closed the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but his sheer physical presence was a barrier against the rest of the world. Jimmy Russo didn't find you, Cassian said softly, his analytical mind assembling the puzzle pieces. He doesn't have the resources to track you past my firewalls. Ricky gave him your location. Ricky facilitated this delivery to scare you out of the only safe place you have. Nora looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. Why? I haven't done anything to him. Because you matter to me, Cassian said. The words slipped out before he could catch them, raw and entirely unguarded. The air in the kitchen went perfectly still. Cassian's jaw tightened, as if regretting the admission, but he didn't back down. He reached out, his rough, scarred thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down Nora's cheek. The contrast of his lethal hands being so incredibly gentle sent a jolt of electricity straight to her heart. Ricky thinks you make me weak, Cassian murmured, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her gaze again. He thinks because I refuse to put my son in an agency's hands, because I listen to you, that I've lost my edge. He wants you gone, so I go back to being a machine. Cassian turned his head, looking down at the betting slip in his hand. He crumpled it into a tight fist. Nobody threatens what is mine. Pack a bag for Luca, and put on something formal. You are not leaving my sight tonight. The annual Columbus Citizens Foundation Gala at the Waldorf Astoria was ostensibly a charity fundraiser for Italian-American heritage. In reality, it was neutral ground, a glittering, chandelier-lit arena, where New York's elite mingled with the city's most powerful and often most dangerous invisible architects. Cassian had intended to skip it to stay home with his son. Now, it was the perfect stage to draw out Ricky's true intentions and send a message to the underworld. Nora stared at herself in the massive gilded mirror of the guest suite. Laid out on her bed an hour earlier had been a breathtaking midnight blue silk gown by Oscar de la Renta. It fit her perfectly, hugging her waist and flowing like liquid midnight down to the floor. Her dark hair was swept up, pinned with a single, subtle diamond comb. She looked nothing like the terrified maid from Queens. She looked like Mafia royalty. When she stepped out into the living room holding a sleeping Luca in a velvet baby carrier, Cassian stopped breathing. He stood by the bar, clad in a razor-sharp Tom Ford tuxedo that made him look like a dark, fallen angel. His eyes swept over her, a dark fire igniting in his gaze. "You look—" Cassian trailed off, clearing his throat as he struggled to find a word that wasn't woefully inadequate. "Beautiful." "I look like a target," Nora whispered nervously, adjusting the strap of the carrier. "Cassian, are you sure about this? Taking Luca into a crowded hotel?" "My personal detail, the men loyal only to me, not Ricky, have secured the ballroom. Arthur is leading them," Cassian reassured her, referring to his oldest, most trusted lieutenant. He stepped forward and placed a warm, heavy hand on the small of her back. The touch sent shivers down her spine. "Ricky expects me to leave you here, terrified, while I attend the gala. He expects to use my absence to send Jimmy's men to finish the job of scaring you off. By bringing you with me, I rob him of the shadows." The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom was a symphony of clinking crystal, string quartets, and hushed high-stakes conversations. As Cassian and Nora descended the grand staircase, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Cassian Moretti, the untouchable widower, was not only attending the gala, but he was accompanied by a stunning unknown woman holding his heir. Cassian guided her to a private, velvet-roped VIP alcove overlooking the dance floor. Arthur and 3 massive, stone-faced guards formed an impenetrable perimeter. For 2 hours, the tension was unbearable. Cassian was pulled into brief, whispered conversations with politicians and rival capos, but his eyes never strayed far from Nora. He was a predator, waiting for the trap to spring. It happened just after the main course was served. Luca woke up, fussy and needing a change. "I need to use the powder room," Nora told Arthur. "I'll escort you, Miss Mitchell," Arthur grunted, signaling to another guard to flank them. The VIP powder room was down a heavily carpeted, quiet corridor away from the main ballroom. Nora entered the plush, marble-lined restroom, leaving Arthur right outside the solid mahogany door. She quickly changed Luca, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the evening. Suddenly the heavy door clicked locked from the inside. Nora spun around. Leaning against the brass door handle was not Arthur. It was a man she recognized from her darkest nightmares. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit that stood out terribly against the Waldorf's opulence. He had a broken nose and a jagged scar across his chin. Jimmy the Pipe Russo. "Well, well, well," Jimmy sneered, pulling a switchblade from his pocket with a snick. "Look at the little maid playing dress-up. Your boy Ricky is a real stand-up guy. Slipped me a key card through the kitchen service elevator." Nora backed up against the vanity, clutching Luca tightly to her chest. "Arthur is right outside that door. If you touch me, Cassian will tear you to pieces." Arthur caught a bad case of a taser to the neck from one of Ricky's boys. Jimmy laughed, taking a step forward. "Here's the deal, sweetheart. Ricky says the boss has gone soft because of you. He paid me 50 grand to drag you out of here, quietly through the service exit. You disappear, the debt is settled, and Ricky gets his boss back. You scream, and I get messy." Nora's mind raced. She had no weapon, nowhere to run, and a baby in her arms. But she was no longer the frightened girl crying over hospital bills. She had spent months surviving in Cassian Moretti's world. As Jimmy lunged forward to grab her arm, Nora didn't shrink away. She grabbed a heavy crystal perfume bottle from the vanity and smashed it directly into Jimmy's face. The loan shark howled in pain, stumbling backward as blood erupted from his nose, the switchblade clattering to the tile floor. He recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with murderous rage. "You stupid little—" Before Jimmy could take another step, the mahogany door didn't just open. It exploded inward, the brass lock shattering off the wood. Cassian stood in the doorway. He didn't look like a CEO or a businessman anymore. The veneer of civilization was entirely gone, replaced by the terrifying, primal violence of a cartel kingpin. His eyes were black, void of any mercy. Jimmy froze, the color draining from his face as he realized exactly who he was standing in front of. "Mr. Moretti, wait." Cassian moved faster than a man of his size should be able to. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need one. He crossed the bathroom in a blur, driving his fist into Jimmy's throat with the force of a freight train. Jimmy collapsed, choking, but Cassian wasn't finished. He grabbed the loan shark by his cheap lapels, hoisting him halfway off the floor, and slammed him face first into the marble mirror. The glass shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Jimmy slumped to the floor, unconscious and bleeding heavily. Cassian stood over him, breathing heavily, his knuckles split and bleeding onto his pristine white cuffs. He turned slowly toward Nora. The violent rage in his eyes instantly melted into raw, desperate panic. "Are you hurt?" he choked out, crossing the room and framing her face with his bloodied hands, uncaring that he was staining her beautiful dress. "Nora, did he touch you? Did he hurt Luca?" "No," Nora breathed, tears finally spilling over her lashes as the adrenaline crashed. She leaned into his touch, her forehead resting against his chest. "I'm okay. We're okay." Cassian wrapped his arms around her and his son, crushing them to him as if terrified they would vanish into smoke. Right there, surrounded by shattered glass and the bleeding body of a rival, Cassian realized the terrifying truth. He hadn't just hired a nanny. He had found the only thing in the world that gave him a reason to live. "Ricky is a dead man," Cassian whispered into her hair, his voice devoid of anger, holding only a cold, absolute promise. "And you are never leaving my side again." The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of flashing city lights and deafening silence. Cassian's men had scrubbed the Waldorf Astoria's VIP powder room before the hotel manager even knew a window had been broken. Jimmy the Pipe had been hauled out through the service elevator, destined for a very long, very painful conversation in a soundproof warehouse in Red Hook. But inside the armored Maybach, the true storm was brewing. Cassian sat beside Nora, Luca finally asleep again in her arms. The Mafia boss was rigid, his knuckles bruised, his jaw locked. He had spent his entire life building fortresses, financial, physical, and emotional, to keep his enemies out. Tonight, his second-in-command had unlocked the front door and invited a monster inside. "Ricky is holding a briefing with the capos tomorrow morning at the docks," Cassian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that barely carried over the hum of the engine. "He thinks Jimmy succeeded. He thinks you're gone, and he's going to use my grief to position himself as the acting head of the syndicate." Nora held Luca tighter, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was exhausted, her beautiful silk gown stained with a few drops of Jimmy's blood, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. Surviving poverty had taught her how to observe. Surviving Cassian Moretti's penthouse had taught her how to fight. "Cassian," Nora said softly, turning to look at him in the dim light of the street lamps. "Ricky isn't just trying to take your seat. He's been stealing from you." Cassian's eyes snapped to hers, sharp and calculating. "Explain." "When I first started cleaning the West Wing, before you hired me as Luca's nanny, my job was to dust the library. Ricky used to hold meetings in there when you were out," Nora began, her voice steadying as the puzzle pieces finally clicked together in her mind. "I didn't mean to pry, but I have a photographic memory for numbers." It's how I kept track of my mother's hospital bills." Cassian leaned in, entirely captivated by the woman who was systematically dismantling his empire's greatest threat. "What did you see?" He kept a secondary ledger in his leather briefcase. He thought I was just the invisible maid, so he left it open on the desk while he poured drinks. Nora explained. "The shipping manifests you approved for the New Jersey ports didn't match his offshore accounts. He's been skimming 20% off the top of the incoming electronics shipments and routing the funds through dummy corporations managed by Bessemer Trust, a private wealth firm. He's building his own war chest using your capital." Cassian sat back, running a hand over his face. A cold, lethal smile slowly spread across his lips. Ricky, the arrogant, custom-tailored underboss, had underestimated the one person in the penthouse who saw everything. He had treated Nora like dirt beneath his expensive shoes, never realizing she held the key to his absolute destruction. "He called you street trash," Cassian murmured, a dark amusement dancing in his eyes. "And you just handed me the rope to hang him with." The next morning, the atmosphere at the Brooklyn Navy Yard was thick with salt, diesel fuel, and impending violence. Ricky stood at the head of a massive folding table inside Warehouse 4, surrounded by 5 of the syndicate's highest-ranking capos. He looked perfectly at ease, adjusting his Rolex as he prepared to deliver his speech about Cassian's distractions and declining mental state. The heavy corrugated steel doors shrieked open. The morning sunlight poured into the warehouse, casting a long, imposing shadow. Cassian walked in, but he wasn't alone. Flanked by Arthur and a dozen heavily armed loyalists, Cassian strode towards the table, and walking right beside him, completely unbothered by the grim, violent men surrounding them, was Nora. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform, nor was she holding a baby. She wore a sharp, tailored black trench coat, her chin held high, radiating a quiet, terrifying authority. Ricky's smug smile vanished instantly. His face went entirely pale as he stared at Nora, realizing in a fraction of a second that Jimmy the Pipe had failed catastrophically. "Ricky," Cassian greeted, pulling out a chair at the head of the table. He didn't sit. He gestured for Nora to take the seat of honor. The Caipos murmured in confusion, but nobody dared question Cassian Moretti. "Boss," Ricky stammered, trying to recover his composure. We weren't expecting you, and certainly not the help." "The help," Cassian repeated, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He tossed a thick manila folder onto the center of the table. "Nora isn't the help, Ricky. She's the auditor." "Law." Cassian nodded to Nora. She picked up a printed spreadsheet from the folder and looked directly into Ricky's panicked eyes. "Account number 884, 291 at Bessemer Trust," Nora read aloud, her voice clear and unwavering. "Registered under a shell company called Apex Logistics. Over the last 8 months, exactly 22.5% of the gross revenue from the Jersey port operations has been funneled into this account. An account which, according to the routing numbers I memorized from your private ledger, belongs entirely to you, Ricky." The silence in the warehouse was absolute. The capos turned to look at Ricky, their expressions morphing from confusion to deadly, predatory rage. In their world, stealing from the family was the ultimate, unforgivable sin. "She's lying!" Ricky shouted, backing away from the table, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's a nobody. A maid. You're going to take the word of a penniless girl from Queens over your own underboss." "I'm taking the word of the woman who saved my son's life," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "The woman who you tried to hand over to a loan shark last night, because you were terrified I was waking up to your treason." Cassian stepped forward, grabbing Ricky by the throat and slamming him backward against a stack of wooden shipping crates. The thud echoed like a gunshot. "You thought she was invisible because she cleaned my floors," Cassian snarled, his face inches from his treacherous lieutenant. "But she saw every piece of dirt you tried to hide. You are finished, Ricky." Cassian released him, turning his back as Arthur and two other men stepped forward, grabbing Ricky by the arms. The arrogant underboss, who had spent months torturing Nora with threats and disdain, was dragged away, screaming and begging for a mercy he would never receive. Hard karma had arrived, delivered by the quiet girl he had thought too small to notice. 6 months later, the penthouse at 432 Park Avenue felt entirely different. The oppressive, cold atmosphere had been replaced by warmth, light, and the chaotic, joyous sounds of a toddler learning to walk. Cassian's empire had never been stronger. With Ricky gone and the internal rot surgically removed, the syndicate operated with a streamlined, terrifying efficiency. But the real shift had happened within Cassian himself. The man who had once viewed his life as a liability had found something worth protecting. It was a crisp spring afternoon. Nora was sitting on the plush velvet sofa, reading a book while Luca took his nap. She wore a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, but resting on her left ring finger was a flawless, 4-carat, emerald-cut diamond. It wasn't a collar, and it wasn't a leash. It was a promise. The private elevator chimed. Cassian walked in, stripping off his suit jacket and immediately loosening his tie. He looked exhausted, but at peace. He crossed the living room and collapsed onto the sofa beside her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the scent of her vanilla perfume. "Rough day at the office?" Nora asked softly, running her fingers through his dark hair. "You have no idea," Cassian murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her jaw. "But I have a surprise for you. We have a guest." Nora frowned, closing her book. "A guest? Here?" Cassian sat up, a wicked glint in his eye. He signaled to Arthur, who was standing by the foyer. Arthur opened the front door, and in walked Violet Sterling. The head of Sterling and Hayes Elite Domestic Staffing looked exactly as she had 8 months ago, impeccably dressed, clutching her Birkin bag, and visibly sweating. She stepped into the living room, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent space until they landed on Nora. Violet stopped dead in her tracks. Her jaw practically hit the floor. She remembered Nora. She remembered the drab grey cleaning uniform, the girl scrubbing the dining table while she, Violet, had demanded $20,000 a week to care for the Mafia boss's baby. Now, that same girl was sitting comfortably on a $30,000 sofa, wearing a diamond that could blind a pilot, with the most dangerous man in New York City looking at her like she hung the moon and the stars. "Miss Sterling," Cassian said, his voice smooth and lethally polite, "you remember my fiancée Nora. I believe you met her the night you tried to extort me." Violet swallowed hard, her face flushing a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. Yes, Miss Mitchell. 'Tis an honor." "I asked Violet here today," Cassian continued, turning to Nora with a loving smile, "because our philanthropic foundation needs a new director to manage the charitable grants we are giving to low-income pediatric wards in Queens. Violet's agency has been struggling lately, so she has agreed to oversee the staffing for our charity events. Pro bono, of course, for the good of the community." Nora looked at Violet. The arrogant woman who had viewed Luca as a hazard and Nora as part of the furniture was now entirely at their mercy, forced to work for free under the direction of the invisible maid. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Nora said, a gentle, knowing smile gracing her lips. "Thank you, Violet. We expect exceptional service." "Of course, Mrs. Moretti." "Soon to be," Violet stammered, bowing her head in absolute defeat before Arthur escorted her back to the elevator. When the doors closed, Cassian pulled Nora into his lap, wrapping his strong arms securely around her waist. "Did you enjoy that?" "A little too much," Nora laughed, resting her forehead against his. "You deserve the world, Nora," Cassian whispered, the humor fading from his eyes, replaced by a fierce, burning devotion. "You walked into a war zone, took my son into your arms, and ended up saving both of our lives. You are the only queen this empire will ever have." He leaned in, capturing her lips in a deep, bruising kiss that tasted of scotch, survival, and a love forged in the darkest shadows of the city. Nora kissed him back, no longer the terrified girl hiding from her debts, but a woman who had conquered a king and claimed her kingdom. From the nursery down the hall, a soft, happy babble echoed through the penthouse. Cassian broke the kiss, a genuine, radiant smile breaking across his scarred face. He stood up, offering his hand to Nora. "Come on," the Mafia boss said softly. "Our boy is awake." Would you love to hear more thrilling, dramatic, romance stories where underdogs rise to the top and claim their ultimate revenge and true love? If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and share it with your friends who love a good Mafia romance. Your support helps me create more intense, emotional, and action-packed tales just for you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. I have so many more twists, turns, and satisfying happily ever afters coming your way. Drop a comment below and tell me your favorite moment from Nora's epic triumph. See you in the next video.